Okay, good morning, everyone. Again, this is a shir on Yom Yerushalayim, and so although it's not yet Pesach, but Yerushalayim is something we should think about all days of the year. And I'd just like to start with a very general observation that there's a fundamental conflict or dichotomy in Judaism between the concept of what we call kedushat makom, that certain places are holier than other places. We talk about Eretz Israel being holier than the rest of the world. Yerushalayim is the holiest part of Eretz Israel. Then you have the Rabbi, then you have the Azara, the courtyard of the temple, then culminating, of course, in the Kodesh HaKodashim. We certainly say some places have more Kedusha, but then there's a counter idea in which Hashem is everywhere, Hashem is accessible everywhere. When Moshe Rabbeinu was standing in front of the burning bush, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, Shal na'alecha mi'al raglecha, take your shoes off your feet, ki hamakom asher ata omed sham, the place where you're standing is admas kodeshi, is holy land, is holy land. And the Chavetz Chaim says that is Hashem's message, that everywhere you are in life, there's the potential for holiness. So on one hand, some places are special. On the other hand, Hashem is everywhere. And that's a fundamental dichotomy in Judaism, but there is no question that although Malay Kol Haaretz Kavodo, God's glory fills the entire universe, there are places in which we're able to access that Kedusha in a much more powerful way. So as the Mekubalim explain, it is not that God is more in one place than he is in another place, but rather my ability to receive, my ability to be uplifted, my ability to connect and be inspired can be a function of where I am even geographically. And this is Eretz Israel, and this is Yerushalayim. And it is very, very important that we recognize this. You know, Baruch Hashem, it's now been 50 years. Many of us remember that day in June 1967, the 28th day of Iyar, 1967, Tavshin Chaf Zayin. That day when Matagor, driving the Jeep through the gates of the old city and announcing in a tone of disbelief, Har Habayit Biyadenu, the Temple Mount is now in our hands. On one hand, there only had been a 19-year gap from 1948 to 1967. 19 years. But in those 19 years was the reflection of the agony of the Jewish soul that had been yearning for a connection to the Beit HaMikdash for almost 2,000 years. We didn't yet achieve it. But to quote a virtuous non-Jew dealing with another cataclysmic conflict of World War II, Winston Churchill, if it was not the end or the beginning of the end, certainly there was a sense that the regaining of Yerushalayim, Ir HaKodesh, the old city, and the regaining of the Har Habayit was l'chol hapachot, the end of the beginning, turning us to the tekufah of Ikvaseh de Mashiach, of Chavlei Mashiach, which will culminate, God willing, very soon in the Geula Shlema of Am Yisrael. And no matter how connected or disconnected one was to the Torah of Hashem or the history of the Jewish people, there was no one's heart that was not moved and not stirred by that connection. The truth of the matter is, when the army was planning the conflict, being aware of the massive buildup in the days preceding the Six-Day War, there was not even a thought, there was not even a hava amina, as we say, that Yerushalayim would be on the agenda. It was a gift, almost as if HaKadosh Baruch Hu dropped the opportunity into our lap. It was an eis ratzon, a time of grace, a time in which HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us a special smile. First of all, the whole victory of the Six-Day War was, of course, Lamala Min HaTeva. And the capturing of Yerushalayim and the Har HaBayit was a gift that we didn't even expect. And yet Hashem gave it to us. It is no accident that what is called the Baal Tshuva movement, although there's quite a lot of work to be done, is essentially a product of the aftermath of the Six-Day War, where people saw the Yad Hashem in such an open way, the Midas HaRachamim of Hashem, the love that Hashem had for Am Yisrael. There's a famous story of a soldier shortly after the Kotel HaMaravi was liberated, who was standing by the Kotel, and he was a Chiloni. He was not a religious Jew. He had no background in Torah and mitzvot. As we say, not yet Orthodox, not yet religious. And he was sobbing, he was crying. And one of his friends, one of his colleagues asked him, "What are you crying about? You don't know what the Beit HaMikdash was, you don't know what all of this represented. What are you crying?" So he pointed to the religious Chayolim, the Hester Bacharim, or the Hester soldiers, who were also crying in joy at the liberation of the Kotel and in sadness that we're not yet Zocha to the Beis HaMikdash. And his response was, "I am crying because I don't know why they are crying. And I know that there's something powerful here, and there's something deep, and there's something strong. And I want to be connected to it." You know that the Mishnah in Maseches Taanis tells us that the 15th of Av is considered to be one of the happiest days of the Jewish calendar. And the Gemara gives a lot of reasons, but one of the reasons was that Hoshea ben Elah, who was the last king of the 10 tribes before Sancheriv exiled the 10 tribes, finally removed the border restrictions, right? Yeravam ben Nevat didn't want the people of the north, the northern 10 tribes, to ever go to Yerushalayim to the Beit HaMikdash. So he put border guards that prevented access to the Beit HaMikdash. Hoshea ben Elah removed those border guards, giving people access. And even though nobody went, that's why there was the exile, he removed the guards and nobody went to the Mikdash anyway. But the fact that we had access to the Beit HaMikdash was in itself a source of great joy. Chav Ches Iyar, although we were not yet Zocha to the Beit HaMikdash b'Shleimuto, but you see, having access to the Makom of Hashras Hashchina is in itself a source of tremendous joy. The Rambam, who was born in Spain, and then because of Islamic persecutions as a young man, young child, and as an adolescent, went to many, many countries. Some people don't know that the Rambam actually spent some time in Eretz Israel itself. He then had to flee to Egypt because of the Almohads. The Rambam talks about the one day in his life that he was privileged to go to the Kotel Maravi, the Western Wall, the last remnants of the temple or the temple courtyard, in which we're told the Shekhinah never left. Now in those days, if you took a picture, you would see the Kotel was only a tiny little fraction. It was only a few feet above the ground. It had been covered with garbage for centuries and centuries. But the Rambam said, the one day in his life when he was zocher lehishtateach, to prostrate himself in front of the Serid Beit HaMikdash, was the happiest day of his life. And the rest of his life, he celebrated that day as a Yom Tov. The rest of his life, that was the holiday, the day that he was zocher lehishtateach. Baruch Hashem, if you live in Yerushalayim, you can go every day, although most of us do not. And in Chutz La'aretz, once again, I'm not here to give musar about the people who are still remaining in Chutz La'aretz, but you need to think, we all need to think about the fact that if God has given us these marvelous opportunities, how can we not take advantage? Well before the invention of the social media platform Twitter, so beloved by the present occupant of the presidency of the United States, the Kuzari uses in Hebrew mitzaf tzafim, which is really translated as twittering, in which the Kuzari actually says that Hey, the Jews pray all the time, bring us back to Eretz Israel, bring us back to Yerushalayim. And when we have the opportunity to go, we don't go. How does Hashem look at those tefillot? And the Kuzari says, like the twittering of birds, as it were, mitzafzafim. So it's something we have to think about. I once heard an amazing halachic psak from Rabbi Yashiv, quite amazing. You know, the halacha is, the theoretical halacha at least is, that if you have not seen the kotel or the makom hamikdash in 30 days, you must rip your garment. Again, different heterim, Erev Shabbat, Rosh Chodesh, but generally speaking, one rips the garment. And yet, many of you might know that if one lives in Yerushalayim, the minhag is, even if you haven't been at the kotel for 6 months or for a year, we don't rip the garment. So somebody asked Rabbi Yashiv, what exactly is the heter for that? I mean, why shouldn't you have to rip your garment? So Rabbi Yashiv said, if you live in Yerushalayim and you let 30 days pass without seeing the kotel, I guess you don't care about it so much. So why should you rip your garment? It's no longer a reflection of the agmat nefesh, of the suffering that you have. It doesn't affect you. Ad kedei kach, that it turns even into this halachic rule. The connection of the Jewish people to Yerushalayim in some ways is so obvious that there's no reason to talk about it, except for the fact that to this very day, we hear in the United Nations and among some of our friends to the east that there's something wrong, something historically perverse about Judaizing Jerusalem. A Jewish city? What are you talking about? A temple on the so-called Temple Mount? What are you talking about? No such thing. And I have to tell you, when I hear these things, I'm sure when you hear these things, I mean, it's not that, you want to refute it. It literally makes no sense. If somebody tells me 2 + 2 is 7.5, it's hard to construct a definitive logical argument to address this alternative, as Kellyanne Conway said, alternative facts, as it were. Yerushalayim is mentioned, either directly or by its many, many nicknames, more than 600 times in Tanakh. It is mentioned in the Quran 0 times. Yerushalayim has over 100 different names, and we know that the more names something has, the more beloved it is. Like you have a child that has many nicknames, Bubula and Mamala and Tatala and Sadakol and Mashiachal. All of these things are symbols of the love and the affection that you have for something in which it has so many names. David HaMelech said, and again, these are Devarim Pshutim that all of you know, Im eshkachech Yerushalayim tishkach yamini. If I forget Yerushalayim, may I forget the use of my right hand, tidbak lishoni lechiki. May my tongue cleave to my palate. Im lo eskarechi. If I don't remember you, im lo ala es Yerushalayim. Al rosh simchati. If I don't put Jerusalem higher and greater than the greatest of my joys. We daven to the city of Yerushalayim, in the direction of the city of Yerushalayim. In Yerushalayim, we daven, of course, in the kivun of the Harabayit, or the Kodesh HaKadoshim, ultimately. We cover the knives. There's a minhag that's brought down in halacha that when you recite Birkat HaMazon, you either remove the knives from the table or you cover them up. And why is that so? So one of the reasons, very strange reason, Maaseh b'chassid echad. There was a maaseh with a pious person that when he got to the prayer, rebuild Jerusalem, he was so filled with agony and yearning and sadness, he took a knife and he stabbed himself. So having a knife when you say Birkat HaMazon is hazardous. It is dangerous. So the sages enacted, get rid of the knives so nothing wrong will happen. Halvai v'halvai, that we should have that type of feeling. But that is the feeling that our prior generations had. The happiest day of a person's life, the day of a chasna, of a simchat chatan v'kala, we break a glass to remember Yerushalayim. We put ashes on the forehead of the chatan to remember Yerushalayim, as well as reciting Im Eshkachech Yerushalayim. When a person is buried, even if they are not given the zechut to be physically buried in Yerushalayim, at least there'll be a little dirt of Jerusalem that will be placed in the grave. So Yerushalayim is somewhat of an obsession for us. Our yearning, our dreams. And Yerushalayim has many, many names, as I mentioned. At the end of the verse, at the end of the Navi Yecheskel, we are told Yerushalayim will be given one extra name. Hashem Shama. God is there. But the Gemara comments, or the Medrash comments, Al Tikri Hashem Shama. Do not read the verse, God is there. Hashem Shema. That Yerushalayim's very name is somehow identified with the Ribono Shel Olam. It is God. Obviously not in the narrow physical sense. But just as Hashem, the Torah, and Yisrael are somehow one entity, all of that is bound with our connection to Yerushalayim. Let me share with you two interesting points from the Rambam in the Moreh Nevuchim about Yerushalayim. The Rambam points out that the holiness of Yerushalayim goes all the way back. It was, as it were, the Even Shetiyah, the foundation stone, was the first part of the world that God created, from which he took the dust or the dirt, from which he fashioned Adam Harishon. It was the site of the Akedat Yitzchak. And yet the Torah nowhere talks about the city of Yerushalayim. The Torah uses, particularly in the book of Devarim, Hamakom Asher Yivchar Hashem. Yerushalayim is described in the Torah as the place that God will choose. And the Rambam says it is almost as if the Torah wanted to keep the future site of the temple, the special Makom of Hashras Hashchina. God wanted to keep it secret until the appropriate time. What's the big secret? Why not tell us? Yerushalayim. And the Rambam says the following. God did not want to reveal the location of the sacred city. Because if God would have revealed the location of the sacred city, the Umot HaOlam would have put up such a fight that B'derech HaTeva, we never would have been able to conquer that city. They didn't realize, so to speak, how special and unique and powerful that city is. Of course, today, B'avonosenu harabim, they do realize it. And that is indeed why the fight over Jerusalem is such a powerful fight. The Rambam says God kept it secret for as long as he could. So there shouldn't be that type of machloket. But then the Rambam makes another point. We know that Yerushalayim is, of course, B'chelko Shel Yehuda. It is in the portion of Yehuda, and the Beit HaMikdash itself straddles Yehuda and Binyamin. And the Rambam writes that if we would have known ahead of time where Yerushalayim and the temple would be, the Shvatim would not have agreed to let it go to Yehuda and Binyamin. They would have fought over it simply because everybody wanted a chelik in Jerusalem. But in reality, in spite of the fact that the Beit HaMikdash is B'chelko Shel Yehuda Binyamin, it does not belong to Yehuda and Binyamin. In fact, similar to the District of Columbia, Lahavdil, which consisted of land from Virginia and Maryland, but it no longer belongs to Virginia and Maryland. It belongs to the people of the United States. Lahavdil, Jerusalem, Yerushalayim, the Gemara tells us, Lo nitchalka lishvatim. Yerushalayim was not divided among the tribes. It belongs to Am Yisrael. Ad kedei kach, that the Gemara gives an amazing psak halacha, and you have to know how that fits our modern practices, that when the Olei Regalim, when all of the Jewish people came from all over the country and internationally to visit the temple for the Shalosh Regalim, Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot, the landlords were not allowed to charge rent for accommodations and lodging because it was not their land. It belonged to Am Yisrael. You can't charge me rent. I own this land too. Now you may ask, so how can there be a hotel industry and everything else? I'd also like to go to the Ramada and say, I'm not paying. You're on my land. But the short answer is that they can't charge you for the space, but they can charge you for the amenities like a bed, like a bathroom. So they figured out ways in which they're halachically allowed to charge you, but theoretically it is not for the space itself. And the like. Lo nischalka l'shvatim. So point number one that the Rambam makes is the need to conceal the identity of Jerusalem. So there should not be a struggle either vis-a-vis the Umot HaOlam or vis-a-vis the Shvatim themselves. The Rambam then makes a second point. We know that Jerusalem was conquered by David HaMelech. Right? David HaMelech conquered it from the Yevusi. And actually, that's a bit of a complicated story in and of itself, because apparently Yerushalayim was conquered in different times and in different segments of it. In the book of Shoftim, we find a kibush of Yerushalayim, but the final kibush of Yerushalayim was b'mei David HaMelech. And yet we find, when it was revealed to David HaMelech, the site of the temple on Mount Moriah, Temple Mount, David HaMelech negotiates with the Yevusi owner, Aravna HaYevusi, in which David collects money from each of the Shvatim and buys the Temple Mount. And the question was, why does David have to buy the Temple Mount? David HaMelech had conquered militarily the city of Yerushalayim. And here the Rambam says a fascinating idea, and one has to know how to apply that in our context. Since the Temple Mount is the makom of Hashrat Hashchina, it is necessary that it be created through peace and not through war. The same idea why David HaMelech himself was not allowed to build a temple, because he was a man of war, even though his wars were mitzvot and his wars were justified. So too, the acquisition of the Temple Mount itself should not be affected solely by military conquest, but by consent. Now, what that actually means is this: Baruch Hashem, in the Six-Day War, we acquired what we acquired by the tremendous military victory that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us. But the Rambam is teaching us that there ultimately has to be an additional step as well, that when the world itself must recognize the God of Israel as the supreme creator, the Jewish people as his beloved children, and the right of the Jewish people to dedicate and consecrate a sanctuary to God. Only then can there be Hashrat HaShechina. Hashrat HaShechina, the Rambam says, is dependent on Shalom and Achdut, even vis-a-vis the nations of the world, and Kal V'chomer, certainly, vis-a-vis the infighting that exists among the Jewish people. So this brings me to what I want to talk about, and that is the names of Jerusalem. Jerusalem, as I said, has many, many, many names. But I want to mention two things. One are some special names that are given to the Temple Mount itself, and two are the names of Yerushalayim as a whole. With respect to the Temple Mount itself, the Gemara has a very interesting observation. Each of the Avot refer to the Temple Mount by a different name. Avram Avinu, at the time of the Akedah, referred to it as a har. This is a mountain. Bahar Hashem Yera'eh. In the mountain of God he shall be seen or revealed. Yitzchak referred to the Temple Mount as a sadeh. When Rivka was brought to him from a distance, Vayetze Yitzchak Lasuach basadeh. Yitzchak went out to converse in the field. Chazal actually say he wanted to daven mincha, lasuach, to converse with God. But that sadeh is none other than Mount Moriah. Yitzchak called it a field. And Yaakov, as he's running away from Esav, as he fears for his life, and he sleeps and he has the magnificent dream of the ladder ascending to heaven, and the angels going up and down the ladder, and God promising him, I will protect you. Chazal say that dream occurred at Mount Moriah, although Yaakov was not in that location, but Hashem kind of brought the mountain to him. So he was literally sleeping on the Temple Mount. And he called it, Ma Norah HaMakom Hazeh. How awesome is this place. Ein Zeh Ki Beis Elokim. This is the house of Hashem. So Avram calls it Har. Yitzchak calls it Sadeh. Yaakov calls it Bayis. And one might suggest that this refers to three different dimensions of how we connect to HaKadosh Baruch Hu through the medium of the Beit HaMikdash and Yerushalayim as a whole. One is a har. What is a mountain? A mountain is a place that protects you from the outside. In fact, many have pointed out, many historians and archaeologists point out, that the strategic importance of Jerusalem in the ancient world was precisely the fact that it was built on hills, and as a result, it would be relatively easy to repel the enemies that come by pelting them with stones or whatever you can throw down at them. Right? It's better to be in a hill than to be in a valley. And thus, in a spiritual sense, a mountain is where you retreat to get away from the corruption and the decadence and the immorality of the world. In Jerusalem, at least in theory, if not always in practice, because much has permeated our mountain, Yerushalayim is the place where one escapes into a deeper consciousness of their relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And I know one can say all sorts of things about so many chilonim, so many things that are not religious, but the truth of the matter is, well, after everything is said and done, everyone that comes to this city, everyone that lives in this city, and everyone that visits this city has a sense that they are stepping away from a world of decadence, corruption, immorality, into a cocoon, as it were, a timeless cocoon of connection to the eternal. And that is the har that immunizes me, that strengthens me, that gives me protection from all of the enemies that can destroy my kedusha. That is har, protection. But a field is more of a positive connotation. If the mountain protects me from all that assault me, the field is a source of productivity, of growth, commensurate to the effort that you put forth. You plow, you plant, you harvest, you thresh, you grind, you mill, you bake. A person works and Hashem gives a bracha to your working, so too Yerushalayim is not only that which protects me from the negative, but is the source of productivity, of growth, of closeness to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And indeed, the Chassam Sofer points out that even the physical activities that beautify Jerusalem, such as picking up garbage or whatever it is, become spiritual because you're glorifying and beautifying the place of the Shekhinah. So the garbage man in Yerushalayim, a garbage man is always very useful and something that we should be very, very grateful for. But a garbage man in Yerushalayim is literally doing God's work. We should do more of that too. But beautifying Hashem, in fact, they tell stories about pious, righteous people who felt it was such a privilege to clean the dust of Jerusalem that they would do it with their long beards even. Ad kedei kach, they saw this as a zechus and an honor. But that is the notion of a field. The har is protection from the outside. The field is the source of growth and spirituality. And then we come to Yaakov, who says that this must be in the context of bayit, of family, of unity, of togetherness. The growth that one has cannot be at the expense of polarization, machlokes, dissension, but it must be under the roof of working together as a bayit. And this brings me, so that's one pair of names, the Har, the Sada, the bayit. Now let's go to the city as a whole. The Medrash actually tells us that Yerushalayim is really two cities in one, similar lahavdil to Minneapolis, St. Paul. Again, lahavdil, although Minneapolis is a fine place. And that is, the original name of the city was Shalem, in English, Salem. Shalem. We read that after Avraham Avinu defeats the four kings and rescues his nephew Lot, and the king of Sodom, in those days Avram was an ally with the king of Sodom, offers Avraham Avinu a huge tribute in exchange for the prisoners, and Avraham Avinu refuses to take it. I want nothing from the Sodomites, that they shouldn't say they are the ones that gave Avram as well. So it mentions Malchi Tzedek, the king of Tzedek. Malchi Tzedek is a name, but it also, many say, that was the title, the official title of the king of Jerusalem, the king of righteousness, the king of justice. And Chazal say that was none other than Shem ben Noach, who was actually Avraham Avinu's ancestor. Brings Avraham Avinu lechem v'yayin, bread and wine. And Avraham gives a tithe. And he's called Malchi Tzedek Melech Shalem. So the original name of the city was Shalem. Now, Avraham Avinu named Mount Moriah, Har HaMoriah, after the Akedah, Yikra Avraham Shem HaMakom Ahu Hashem Yireh. Avram named that mountain, God will see, God will look down, God will remember the goodness and the Mesiras Nefesh that was shown to him this day. And then the pasuk goes on and says, Asher Yeyamer Hayom, and it will be said in the ultimate day, Bahar Hashem Yera'eh. God will be seen. Again, the Medrash explains this somewhat enigmatic pasuk. What we can say about Hashem right now is, Hashem sees and remembers us. But we don't necessarily perceive the ways of Hashem. They are mysterious. But when the ultimate redemption comes, it will not just be Hashem sees us, but Bahar Hashem Yera'eh. He will be perceived by us, meaning we will understand his ways of justice. Hayom is the Vayomahu Yi Hashem Echad U'Shmo Echad, that day of redemption. But be it as it may, Avram called the mountain Hashem Yireh. So the Medrash says, Shalem is the city, Yireh is the Temple Mount. So reversing the words, Yireh Shalem, Minneapolis, St. Paul. Yireh Shalem. Now, you may say, okay, that's Yireh. How do you get Yeru? Very simple, the Medrash says. Aleph and Hey equal Vav, equal 6. So Aleph and Hey simply become Vav. So Yireh Shalem becomes Yeru Shalem. Now, one final point is, well, wait a second. So that's Yerushalem. How do you get Yerushalayim? Right? So in English we have it right. Jerusalem. That's exactly it. Yerushalem. In fact, in Tanakh, most of the time, Yerushalayim, although it's pronounced Yerushalayim, is typically written without a yud, because its original name was Yerushalem, because the original name was Shalem. But the Medrash tells us that the Yud, Mem, is a Lashon Rabim. Yadayim, 2 hands. Raglayim, right, 2 feet. Oznayim, 2 ears. Yerushalayim, two Yerusalems. And it doesn't mean East Jerusalem and West Jerusalem, but the Yerushalayim of Shamayim, Shalmala, is mechuvan, is directly opposite the Yerushalayim Shalmata. So Yerushalayim, Yereh Shalem, Yerushalayim Shalmala, Yerushalayim Shalmata. Again, what is the significance of these two names? So here, once again, this connotes the dichotomy of Jerusalem, a dichotomy that I think all of us who live here experience even today. Ideally, Yerushalayim is supposed to be Shalom, the city of peace, the city of harmony. Ki'ir shechubcha la yachtav, the city in which all of its parts come together. In that Tehillim that talk about Yerushalayim, we have the famous verse, Hine matov u'manoim shevet achim gam yachad. How nice and pleasant is it when brethren can sit together with Shalom. So on one hand, it is the city of peace, the city of harmony. And yet, there's another perspective, Yireh. Now, Yireh in the Pasuk itself is a verb that means Hashem sees. Hashem sees. But the Medrash tells us that the letters of Yireh, Yud Reish Aleph Hey, are the same letters as Yirah, meaning to fear God. So the Medrash has a play on words that the name of Yerushalayim is the place where God is feared and revered. Although again, that is not the translation of the word in the actual Pasuk, but the Medrash takes it as Yireh. Now Yireh means that the nature of Yerushalayim is going to be a city of passion, hitlahavut, enthusiasm, kanaut, zealousness, striving to serve God. It is said in Kabbalah that, there are four basic elements: earth, wind, fire, water, and they correspond to the four holy cities of Eretz Israel. Tzfat, the ethereal city of the mystics, that represents air. Tiberia, on the Sea of Galilee, represents water. Chevron, which is Beit HaKvarot, Marat HaMachpelah, represents dirt. Afar, Shiflut. Yerushalayim represents fire. This is the city of fire. Now, I remember years ago when I first came to Yerushalayim, so outside my window one morning, there was a little fender bender automobile accident. A fender bender, literally, just a little tap. And within 10 minutes, there was a crowd of around 50 people who were debating who was at fault. And somebody said, well, let's just call the police. He said, no, we have to first argue about this for a while. In Yerushalayim, everything's an argument. On the small things, it's just a joke. It's something that brings a smile. But there are big things. The polarization, the disharmony, the sinat chinam that we have. But that comes from fire. Because when you care deeply about something, it's sometimes hard to see the other person's viewpoint. And yet what is going on here is Yerushalayim has to be both. It has to be the city of Shalom and the city of Yireh. That you can't allow, as it were, the zealousness and commitment of your fervor for Torah to undermine your achdut and avat Yisrael. But at the same time, you can't allow the avat Yisrael to weaken your zealousness and commitment to the Torah Hashem. This is quite a very difficult path to navigate. There are people who are strong and firm in their commitment, in their hitlahavut. But they look at others who are not quite as religious as them, at least in their perception, with a sense of disdain and illegitimacy. And then there are others who you might call Big Tent Jews. I'm okay, you're okay, everything's good. And they're filled with love of their fellow Jew. But as a result, their commitment to truth and to Torah is sometimes weak and milquetoast. Now, one could be one or the other. But Yerushalayim is a city of contradictions. Yerushalayim is a city in which both midot must somehow be melded together and combined. And indeed, it was none other than Avraham Avinu who himself was the man of chesed, and the man of kindness, and the man of compassion, and the man of understanding, who added to shalem the word yirah, which the Medrash understands as reverence and fear of God. That somehow the big challenge that we face is to create both the city of peace, harmony, love, and the city of commitment, kana'ut, hitlahavut, in positive and constructive ways. And without getting too political, this itself would at least be a theoretical key, very theoretical key, of diffusing so many of the tensions between religious and secular, whether it be over the army, whether it be over so many issues. Because when a person is demonized, they will respond by demonizing the other. When a person is respected, when a person is validated, they will feel respect towards the other. This was the message of Shlomo HaMelech in the book of Mishlei, a very famous pasuk. Kamayim hapanim el panim, kain leiv ha'adam li'adam. As water reflects the face that you show the water, so too the heart of one human being reflects what that human being is shown. The Vilna Gaon explains, I look at my face in a pool of water. Whatever I show that water is what I will see in return. I show the water a smiling countenance, I will get back a smiling countenance. I show the water frowning and anger, I will get back an angry face. Shlomo HaMelech says, the heart of one human being to another human being reflects exactly what you show. You show a person that they're a nothing, you show a person that they're a worthless, you show a person that their view doesn't count because it's not on the approved list, then they will feel the same way about you. One of the things I noticed when I made Aliyah 7 years ago is that in Eretz Israel, when there is a machloket, the other side, whoever the other side is 100% wrong. There is not the concept of saying, I see your point, but we need to consider this. No, you're wrong. Well, a response towards a person, you're wrong, is going to elicit an endless cycle of, no, you're wrong. And that's why nothing ever happens, nothing ever gets done, nothing ever moves, because there's no willingness to be open, to try to understand the point of view. And the Bali Musar say, the reason why shalom is peace is connected to shleimut, perfection. Perfection means seeing the whole story. When you see the whole story of something, then there's going to be harmony, because each one understands where the other person is coming from. When you only focus on part of the story, there's not shleimut. If there's not shleimut, there is not going to be shalom. So, names are very important. The name that we give a child at a Brit, according to the Arizal, is indicative of the root of that child's neshama. The names that the Avot HaKadoshim gave to the city of Yerushalayim describes the nature of the city, and it describes our mission in this city, to combine shalom and yirah, and somehow do not let one value undermine or diminish the significance of the other value. And of course, let me say that Avraham Avinu, once again, is our greatest role model. On one hand, he is the Avraham Avinu whose home was open to everybody, idol worshippers, who prayed for the decadent people of Sodom, who argued with Hashem when he didn't argue over his own son. When Hashem said, kill Yitzchak, or take Yitzchak as a korban, Avram says, sure. When it comes to Sodom, Avram argues and bargains. And yet that same Avram is called Avraham HaIvri. And Ivri means Avraham from the other side of the river, the wrong side of the tracks. But the Medrash tells us it doesn't just refer to his geographical origin in Haran, but it refers to the fact that Avraham Avinu had the courage of his emunah, even if the whole world thought he was crazy for a while. He preserved his strength and his emunah in a society that totally rejected what he believed in until he was able to have a tremendous impact on that society. Given the fact that the 28th of Iyar, of course, always falls during the counting of the Omer before Shavuot, let me point out a little bit ahead of time that these two ideas, this dichotomy, are actually two themes in the counting of the Omer itself. On one hand, counting of the Omer is a preparation for Matan Torah, linking the holiday of freedom to the holiday of responsibility, Kabbalat O Malchut Shamayim, accepting the yoke of heaven, mitzvot, serving God, and zealously accepting upon ourselves the obligation of the Torah. That's the aspect that corresponds to Yirah. But at the same time, we know that we mourn during the Sfirah. We don't make weddings, haircuts, or listen to music. And part of that is because this was the Tekufah when the 24,000 students of Rabbi Akiva died. And Chazal say the reason they died was because they did not show proper kavod, respect for each other. And therefore, side by side with their hachana lekabbalat haTorah, which is the avodah of yirah, is the need to have kavod for every Jew, which is the aspect of shalem, to combine those two things. Living in Israel is a challenge that we face every single day. You know, people say, well, Americans are tolerant, accepting. But again, it's a complicated question. When you're overly tolerant, is that because you're tolerant and loving? Or is it because the passion is less? Here, the passions are strong. When passions are strong, shalom is difficult to achieve. But it's even more important that we try to achieve it. Let me just end that there is a famous, beautiful Maimer Chazal, Kol mitabel al Yerushalayim, all who mourn, all who grieve over Jerusalem. Zocheh v'ro'eh b'simchata. They will merit and they will experience the ultimate joy of Yerushalayim. The Chassam Sofer points out that I actually mistranslated this phrase. Zocheh v'ro'eh is not a future phrase. It does not say Yizkeh v'yireh. But Kol mitabel al Yerushalayim, Zocheh, merits and sees the simcha. The Chassam Sofer says, what does that mean? It should say, you will merit to see the Binyan Yerushalayim. How can I use a present if you're mitabel? And the Chassam Sofer offers a beautiful explanation. He says that you'll remember that when Yosef was sold into slavery and the brothers told Yaakov that Yosef had been killed by a wild animal, and this is his ketonet that has been dipped in blood. So the pasuk says that Yaakov could not be comforted. No matter what they said to him, he could not be comforted. And Rashi brings from Chazal that although Yaakov may have thought that Yosef was dead, but the koach that Hashem put into the world, that we get over suffering when, God forbid, somebody dies, only applies if somebody's dead. As long as someone's alive, your neshama somehow senses it. And you cannot be comforted when you're separated from someone that's alive. Now, why didn't Yaakov figure out that Yosef was alive? Well, that's a good question on Rashi, but that's what Rashi says. Yaakov could not be Makabel Tanchumin because Yosef was alive. As opposed to if something is dead, Hashem put into the nature of the world that as difficult as it is, time does heal the acuteness of pain. That's one of the chasadim of Hashem. Not completely, but there is a healing process. So here's the Chassam Sofer says. A Jew mourns over Jerusalem after thousands of years. Why are you mourning? If we haven't had a Beit HaMikdash for almost 2,000 years, it's dead. Doesn't Hashem allow you to get over it? If you don't get over it, it's because it's still alive. And therefore the Chassam Sofer says, if I am still mitabel al Yerushalayim, that itself is the comfort that it's not yet dead. That's why it says, Zocher v'ro'eh b'simchata. Why are you mourning? They tell a story, I believe it's apocryphal, so I don't want to pass it out as a true story, about Napoleon. That Napoleon once entered a Beit Knesset on Tisha B'Av. And he sees Jews sitting on the floor, crying and mourning. And he said, what are they mourning about? Did somebody die today? He says, no, they're mourning over the destruction of the temple. When did that happen? It happened in the year 70, 1,700 years ago. And Napoleon said, if people are still mourning something that happened more than almost 2,000 years ago, then such a people can never be vanquished. Such a people, for sure, are going to be redeemed by their God. On the other side of the coin, Jonathan Rosenblum writes a story, famous, I think it's been a famous article, probably 10 years ago, in which a certain Palestinian terrorist was released in one of the prisoner swaps. And he was interviewed by Al Jazeera, and he was asked, in your many years in prison, did you ever give up the idea of your struggle? Did you ever realize you were outnumbered? The Israeli army was so much more powerful than your small ad hoc groups. What gave you, Rahman al-Islam, what gave you the strength to persevere in your course? And this is what the person said. And this, I think, is a muster that we need to pay attention to. He said, yeah, I had about given up. I had about said, Israel is just going to win, can't do anything. But it was during Pesach, so actually we'll connect in Yanei Diyuma. And I saw my guard eating some bread. And I said to him, how are you eating bread during Pesach? And the guard said, that story happened 2,000 years ago. It has no relevance to me. And then the terrorist said, that's the difference. We care about what happened 2,000 years ago. They don't. That's why we, Rahman al-Islam, I hate saying the words, we will win. The Musar here, and God sometimes puts Musar into the mouths of the most unlikely candidates and the most undeserving candidates, is the more we care, the more we're zocha to our connection to Eretz Israel. Hashem gives us geula commensurate to our yearning. This is why, again, one cannot be a Navi, but the various territorial concessions, the various chipping away of things that happens, are tests from HaKadosh Baruch Hu to see how much we care, how much we want. The more we want, the more we merit geula. And I'll just end with one final midrash. The midrash tells us that why was Moshe Rabbeinu not deserving of being buried in Eretz Israel when Yosef was buried in Eretz Israel? They carried his bones for 40 years. And the Gemara says, because when Yosef is asked by Paro, where do you come from? Yosef says, I come from the land of the Hebrews, I come from Eretz Israel. Therefore, he didn't deny his origin. Therefore, he merits to be buried in his country of origin. Moshe Rabbeinu identifies himself to Yisro as Ish Mitzri, I'm an Egyptian man. Moshe is Kofer Biartzo. He denies his connection to the land. Therefore, he is not buried in the land. So the question is very obvious. What do you mean he denied his connection? Moshe was never in Eretz Israel. Moshe was born in Egypt. Moshe didn't lie. Moshe didn't deny anything. So the Hasidic Sfarim say, we see from here, that no matter where you're born, and no matter where you physically live, you are from Eretz Israel, you are from Yerushalayim. This is your home. This is your place. Maybe you happen to have been born in Baltimore or Detroit or Iowa or Los Angeles or London. But that's kind of what we call an accident of birth, so to speak. Your place is here. And for that, Moshe Rabbeinu himself was criticized because he was Kofer B'Artz. And they say there was a Hasidic Rebbe whose family had been in Poland for 500 years. And when he was asked where he was from, he said, Ich bin a Yid von Yerushalayim. I am a Jew from Jerusalem, but for the past few centuries, we've been hanging around in Poland. And this is what all of us need to internalize. Those of us who have the great, great zechut of living in Yerushalayim, and those of us that don't yet have that great zechut, but this is our home, this is our place, this is where our neshama belongs. And the more we yearn, and the more we're mitabel over what we don't yet have, the more geula becomes a reality, and the more we will be zocha to the blessings of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So may HaKadosh Baruch Hu rebuild the Chomot Yerushalayim. May He bring His bracha on Eretz Yisrael, on Am Yisrael. May all of us be zocha b'bias HaMashiach b'mheira v'yameinu.